the difference exactly was between the other tzaddikim and the chasidecha. Because even though it says chasidecha yivrachucha, that only the chassid can draw down this type of light, we did find by other tzaddikim that they also seemingly had the power to change nature at will. They also had the fusion of tefillah and bracha. If you remember that tefillah had the idea that it could change the will of Hashem, but bracha had the idea that it was an automatic certainty that you could do it. So binding those things together means you could change the will of Hashem like on command. And we found that it seems like many people, many tzaddikim, different levels of tzaddikim could do that, not only chasidecha. And nonetheless, when it says, Yoducha Hashem kol ma'asecha, all your creations will acknowledge you, but your chassid will draw you down. It sounds like it's the exclusive right of the chassid that he's able to do this. So what's the difference exactly between his level and their level? So we said that the true level of hodah, because that's what we're drawing down bracha from the place of hodah. Yeah, everyone, you with me on that? Hodah means the place of acknowledgement, that which cannot be known. And nonetheless, the chassid can draw it down. So that's what it says, Yoducha, which is hodah, Yoducha Hashem kol ma'asecha, and then chasidecha yivrachucha. The chassid can draw down from the hodah, from the level of hodah, from the Orient. So we're saying that there must be the different levels of hodah. So in general, we said that all the levels of keser, you can properly apply to them the word hodah, because they're all above the Seder Ishtalshlus, and therefore you can't really know any of them. So if you're drawing down from any of the levels of keser, you're drawing down a bracha from the place of hodah. So all the tzaddikim can do that. But what's the unique quality of the chassid is that the third level of the keser is the true place which we can call hodah, because the other ones are different aspects of divinity, of light. And the third highest level of the keser is the essence, basically. That's what we said, the unknowable head, the highest level is where the essence is found. So that is where the true level of hodah, and that's the level that the chassid draws down from. So therefore, the true terminology of drawing down from a place of hodah applies to the highest place of hodah. And therefore, but now what does that look like, and what's the difference? We're going to see.
And that third level is Panini Atik?
Yes, Panimius Atik. Panimius Atik. So then we went on to discuss the difference between will and pleasure. And we said that the way each one of those two things has a different effect, they're both makif powers. In other words, both will and pleasure represent the levels of keser in a person. And will is the lower level of keser, arich, tainug is the middle level of keser, which is atik. And they have a different effect upon the Seder Hishtalshlus of a person, which is your 10 spheros, your intellect, your emotions, etc. So we said, who remembers what's the effect that will? What's the difference between them? Their effect on your limbs and on your powers. Anyone remember?
The will?
The will versus the pleasure.
What do you mean effect?
In other words, they each have an interaction with your mind and heart, with your limbs. But in the way they interact with the rest of you is different from each other. Is the question clear? Will.
Yeah.
Well, you have to like you got
Well,
to
I
investigate.
get someone else to
Pleasure
answer.
is something.
What was the question? Want me to answer again? I can answer.
What'd you say?
I can answer again.
Go ahead. You said something?
Well, I answered it last time.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Yeah.
You did answer last time?
Yeah.
Okay.
That the difference is that the will is like it's the same effect on the whole body. It's like unified, like the same.
No, but also the pleasure has that. They're both.
Okay.
What you said was, what's the yesterday you were saying, what's like different from the powers that are in your body versus the will. But now we're asking, what's the difference between the will and the pleasure, which are both makif powers, and how do they differ from each other in terms to their effect that they have on the body?
Okay. An effect on the body.
In other words, let's just clarify one more point real quick, right? There's a difference between what we call kochos panimim. There's a difference what we call kochos panimim, which is inner powers, which basically equals your 10 spheros, right? from Chokhmah down to Malchus. Those are called the inner powers. Why are they called inner? Because it's like light that goes in vessel, right? Meaning to say that your intellect resides in your head, and your heart, and your emotions reside in your heart, and your action resides in your hand, your vision in your eye. In other words, all these different levels of light that actually goes inside of the vessel to enliven it, those are called the inner powers. And then what Baruch was saying last time, then there's the makif powers, which means they're powers that you have which are not found in a particular place or another one. And those are in general the keser of the person. Yeah, because basically your will is everywhere in your body. It doesn't have a particular vessel. Also, your pleasure is everywhere in your body. It doesn't have a particular place. It doesn't have a particular kli. It's in all the kelim and it's in none of them at the same time because nothing like holds it. So we're talking about now. So you have your makif powers and your panemius powers, right? We're asking right now, what's the difference of the effect that the ratzon, the will, has on the panemius powers versus the effect that the tainug, the pleasure, has on the panemius powers?
We're saying another time that the tainug is making the ratzon.
We did say that.
From the tainug.
We did say that.
I don't know if that answers the question of like how they are affecting the body.
A little bit different maybe.
But it's
But what we were saying there is just like a cool idea is that, thinking about how these tzaddikim are actually changing nature, you could see how they're going up. Hashem also has his inner powers and his outer powers. So the inner powers is like sort of what's projected as the reality, and there's this unforeseen force of Hashem's will which is really making it all happen. And then really beyond that is like an unforeseen pleasure which is really directing Hashem's will. So you can already see like if a tzaddik can reach up into Hashem's will, he can redirect the reality. If he can reach up into Hashem's pleasure, he can even redirect Hashem's will.
right.
So
right,
but again, what is the difference in the way that the will and the pleasure affect the body? And it's like this. I'm not getting the answer out of you guys. So one is by force.
Oh, we got
And
it.
one is sort of by pleasure. Meaning to say when the will... Yeah, you were getting in there.
One you have to instigate. You have to
Right.
you got to do something that's activated. The other one's just kind of coming. So comparatively, pleasure's more
Well, the difference is, again, the way that they affect the powers of the body is that one, the will, it affects them by force. In other words, with your willpower, you override the natural tendency of your body.
Right.
That your body wants to do such and such a thing naturally, your Seder Yishtalshlus is interested in going in such and such a way. Well, if you go back to the level of the will, it can just disrupt its natural process and interrupt it and make it do what it wants. So, but it's like by a way of seizing control, as it were, of the body and forcing it to do what the will wants. When it comes to pleasure, it doesn't have to force and seize control. Why? Because the pleasure itself, if it's pleasurable, it's also pleasurable for your body, right? So if you can tap into, so to speak, your divine pleasure, that means you don't have to undo the... Mazel tov, mazel tov. You don't have to undo... Yeah. Yaron had a baby
Just
girl.
got her name.
Oh, really?
Miriam.
Mazel tov.
Today?
Granddaughter.
Yeah, right now.
Oh, you do it in... Where'd they name her? Oh, really? How do you name her without a sefer? Oh, you had a sefer to her. Okay.
Today's
Hanukkah.
Hanukkah.
Nice. You named her? Or the father was there?
No, his father from
Wow.
Only Simcha.
Mazel tov. What is it? Simcha Miriam?
Sheer Miriam.
Shira Miriam.
There, Arba.
My
Wow.
mother was Miriam.
Wow. Shira Miriam. It's a beautiful name. First granddaughter.
Wow. Grandpa.
He's just grinning from ear to ear, that guy.
That's great.
All right, let's bring it back home here. So we're saying, however, when the pleasure, which is beyond the will, is accessed, so then the pleasure also is pleasurable, as it were, to the body. So it doesn't have to override the natural tendencies of the body. It actually is sort of germane, as it were, to the body, and the body willingly goes along with the pleasure sensors, because you're not controlling it, making it do what it doesn't want to do. You're basically revealing a certain level of pleasure to the body itself, and therefore it wants to do it automatically.
Yeah, right.
Right? You got that?
Force could be the natural flow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're still changing, because I guess what it is like your Seder Ishtalshelus is naturally flowing in like a direction of animalistic pleasure at first. So you first have to bring your will, the will of your godly soul, and like make it do something else. But if you can access the pleasure of your godly soul and make that sort of come alive in the body, then your animal soul will do what's pleasurable to your godly soul. It won't have to override it. It will become pleasurable to the animal soul as well, if you can sort of arrive at such a level and bring that out to fruition. So that's the idea. So let's just see exactly where we left off.
There's like different levels a person has, like the Ratzon versus like
What's the
Tainug.
initial question again?
The difference between
How's
Affect the
what's
body.
the difference between the will and the pleasure? How does it affect the body?
Are we talking about like different levels of Siddiqim? Like
Yes,
the will,
yes.
Tainug?
Yeah, hold on, I'm going to get all into it right now. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
That doesn't, your answer doesn't really, it's not affecting, it's more of a process. How does it affect the body?
No, it affects the body in a major way. I mean, and it was what is their effect? The difference of their effect upon the body, and one is that the will makes the body do what it doesn't want to do, and the pleasure makes the body do what it does want to do. Let's take it from Os Ches down to the bottom of page Samech Ches. So the last, second to last line. Hold on 1 second. Yeah. So he says, "V'hapula shanaisis ba'akochos va'ivarim al yidei atainug." So the effect that happens to the powers of your body and your limbs of your body through pleasure, through arriving at your pleasure. Kevan shatainug hu panimius v'chayus da'akochos va'ivarim atzmam. Since pleasure is actually the inner life force of the powers themselves, right? In other words, will is something that is superimposed upon the powers, but pleasure is their inner chayas, right? In other words, they are basically pleasure sensors. Their life force is what's pleasurable to them, right? Not something that has to act upon them. So if you're able to tap into the pleasure, and the pleasure is their inner life and will, it's not affecting them from the outside, but rather from the inside. Therefore, what happens to them through arousing the pleasure, it's not in a way of overriding in force, but the limbs themselves want to do the new thing. Right? In other words, they're happy to go where the pleasure is. So if the pleasure is in godliness, if you can bring out the godly pleasure, you don't have to override, so to speak, your Seder Ishtalshelus. And so this is a little bit of review also. We said this last time. And so it is above, that the change, shashinoi kiviyachol, shanaisa bedargad ishtalshelus, that the change that happens in the level of the ishtalshelus, i.e., nature changing, uprooting the decrees that Hashem put into nature, that the change that happens when a tzaddik, and remember it is particularly the level of tzaddik versus yashar and chassid. The tzaddik reaches the external part of the keser called the arich. When a tzaddik will perform his thing, and therefore he's drawing into the chitzonius keser, nimsheches al yedei hatzadikim, degam kashemitzad b'chinas ishtalshelus yeshna gezerah. Which means that even though, according to the ishtalshelus, according to the natural world, there will be a decree, shelo diyam shachas hashpa, that something should not be coming down. In other words, as you said last time, the river should just keep its course. It shouldn't be like a new amshacha that the river should stop its course. Since the tzaddik is tapped into where the keser of Hashem, the lowest part of the keser, which is his will, since he's able to go up into the will, he goes past the nature, which is above the ishtalshelus, the chitzonius hakeser, misbateles hagezera. He can nullify the decree, hu ba'ofen the shlita umemshela, but it's in a way of dominating over the nature, and forcing the nature to do what he wants it to do, because that's where he's accessing is the will, and the relationship of the will to the nature is that it can control it, but only by force. It can't really speak its language. It can just make it do what it wants. And that's why the language is very distinct when it says tzaddik moshel b'yidos elokim. The word we use for a tzaddik is that he also had this ability to sort of nullify decrees, etc. We said he's moshel, he's dominating with the fear of God. Because that's his interaction with the world around him, that he can make it do what he wants by going and tapping into the will, which controls the world. That this level of will, which is above the ishtalshelus, its relationship is a dominator upon the ishtalshelus. So we can control nature, but not by sort of like being nature's friend, right? By making nature do what he commands.
Which sholet?
Like domination. Okay, so we're going on. This is new. Does anyone need a copy? By the way, I have one more here. Want a copy? Here you go. Show them where it is, maybe.
God, by doing that, creating a flood, could create negative?
He could create negative. I suppose if he wanted to. I mean, he's again, his whole thing is if he's a tzaddik, he's like tapped into helping people and doing the right thing. So if a flood is what's required, I guess that he could make a flood. And there are some tzaddikim, by the way, who do like kind of nasty things like that. We talk about. Huh? Yeah. Well, he was the bad guy, basically. But, Elisha, no, I'm sorry, I'm talking about his servant. Why, what did Elisha do?
Elisha was with the drought.
He made the drought? Yeah. Bilam is a Rasha, though. He was, no, but what I'm saying is that, we're accustomed to tzaddikim that act in a way of chesed, basically. Because, from the time of the Alter Rebbe already, the Rebbe has a whole sikh about this, that even though each one of them comes from a different midah, there's 7 of them and they're all different midos, but they all decide to like outwardly conduct themselves in a way of kindness and chesed. But there are tzaddikim, and you hear stories that when there was a story about Baba Sali actually, that this guy came in and he opened up a kollel next to the Baba Sali, and he came in and he spoke disparagingly about the Baal Shem Tov in front of the Baba Sali. And Baba Sali got very upset. He's like, "You're talking about the Baal Shem Tov that way? Your kollel will be closed tomorrow." And all of a sudden, he just with his word, the place was shut down. Every single one of them had to leave town. Whatever. There is such a thing as tzaddikim having a little bit of a chip on their shoulder there. But I mean, again, it's for some kind of a higher. Obviously, they're divinely ordained to have that kind of power. But yeah, Neshicha Shaul, it says you have to beware of the chachamim, because their bite is the bite of a snake rather.
The stories of tzaddik bring someone back to life. That would be an example of whether Shiva dominates that law.
It's hard to say what level they're taking it from. In other words, just because you see nature changing, right? We don't know if they're Rashbi also made it rain, but he wasn't doing it from tapping into just the overriding the will. He tapped into a higher and higher level. So just by seeing the miracle, they're all tapping into something which they can transform the nature and the ishtalshelus. But the question is, how are they transforming? They're transforming by dominating over it and making it do what it doesn't want to do, or are they somehow able to go to such a place where they make it want to do that? That's what we're getting to. You see, that's the whole point of the conversation right now.
Right. Is it because they're coming from a higher source than the will? So they're able to command the will?
Yeah. If they're coming from just the will, then their only way of dealing with nature is by making nature do what it wants to do against its will. But if they're going to a higher, we're going to talk about that right now. If they're going to a higher place than the will, then they can access the inner pleasure of the world to do Hashem's will. All right, so let's go on here.
Pleasure.
Okay, so we're going on, yeah. Bittul hagezera shemitzad bechinas ishtalshelus. So to nullify a decree from the level of ishtalshelus, al yedei hamshachas panimius hakeser, by tapping into the inner level of the keser, Shenimsheches al yedei avodah the Yesharim, which is accomplished by what we call the Yesharim. What level of the Kesser do they get to? What's Panemius Kesser?
He's Ati.
Ari.
Atik. Right? You have Arich, Atik, which is called external pleasure, and Kesser, external Kesser and internal Kesser. And then you have Panemius Atik, which is this third level we didn't get to yet. So we're talking about these tzaddikim now are able to access the Panemius of the Kesser. That's called Atik. That's the middle level of the Kesser. And that's drawn down by the avodah of what we call Yesharim. There's 3 levels of tzaddikim: Tzaddik, Yashar, and Chassid.
Right.
So this is the Yesharim now. Lobo over the Shlita. They don't do it in such a way where they have to dominate on the nature. Ela de Kevan Shat Tainug the Panemius HaKesser. But since the Tainug, the pleasure that's found in the Panemius HaKesser, who a Panemius the Ishtalshlus, that's actually also the inner light of the Ishtalshlus as well. In other words, that level of divine pleasure, right? Which it's also the pleasure of the Ishtalshlus. It's just that it's masked usually by sort of a foreign pleasure, like an animalistic pleasure of the Ishtalshlus. But in truth, if you can bring out the pleasure of the Ishtalshlus mitzad, it's like that it also has a divine excitement. In other words, the animal soul also will take pleasure from godly things if it can experience such a pleasure. It thinks that godly things are going to diminish its pleasure. But if it knew that it would find also pleasure in divine things, it would be happy to do those things. It's not the automatic pleasure. It's like sort of like a person goes on a diet and a person starts working out. Those things are not pleasurable, so he doesn't want to do them. But if he'll do them, he'll realize he's having more pleasure from being a good person than a bad person. Right? So there's a pleasure that the animal has from being good. A tame animal can live in a house and he can have the master's food. In other words, it's good for him to do God's will. It's just that it's sort of a little bit foreign for him to figure out how to get there. But if you can figure out how to access the divine pleasure, it's already also the Panemius inner life of the Ishtalshalus. L'chein, therefore, al yedei hamshachas Panemius haratzon v'atainuk, therefore, by drawing forth the Panemius of the Ratzon and the pleasure, which is called the Panemius of the Kesser, Sheratzon Sham Hu Shetiyah Hashpa, right? And at that level, the will is automatically wanting that it should give the world this new level of pleasure. In other words, there's an intrinsic, since the will follows the pleasure, and the pleasure is interested in doing the right thing, the will is automatically going to be, without forcing it, it's going to automatically be in the direction of accomplishing that thing. Therefore, the bitla gezerah hu gam mitzad ishtalshlus gufa, and therefore the nullity of the decree also comes from the standpoint of the ishtalshlus itself. In other words, the bad guys agree and willingly want to undo their decrees. In other words, this really is the whole story of like Yutes Kislev and Pada B'Shalom Nafshi, is that the many are with me, right? David HaMelech was fighting against his son Absalom, and his son had all these warriors, and really they wanted to go with David. So there's, if the inner will of the enemy is actually to do the right thing, so you don't have to force it, you don't have to go to war with it, you don't have to undo it, you just have to like sort of unleash that their true will is to be with David, and therefore automatically all your enemies go away. Automatically the ishtalshalus, which is sort of the nature which is going against God's will, will automatically start doing God's will if you could make it realize that it is pleasurable for it to do God's will. You follow that? So the difference is that if you're accessing the world with merely the level of will, the world it will unwillingly go along with you. And if you're accessing from the place of pleasure, determines the will. And therefore the world willingly goes along with you. And therefore the gezerah will be undone, or the river will go the other way, whatever it is, according to the river's own interests. People seem confused here.
Are we saying that the tzaddikim, they tap into that level of pleasure?
Not tzaddikim, yasharim.
Or yashar?
Right? Every tzaddik has a different stage where he's able to tap into. A tzaddik only taps into the will. And therefore his way of dealing with nature is he has to sort of battle with it. He'll win. because he's Moshel. He's a controller of the will, so he can force it. But what's wrong with that is that he didn't really get the Hishtalshlus on his side. He's just dominating over the Hishtalshlus, which means there's still an enemy there. It's just the enemy is subdued to him. Whereas if you get him to the place of the pleasure, the pleasure is also the pleasure of the Hishtalshlus. It's they like it. So if you can tap into the divine state of pleasure, then you don't have any more enemies, because it's turned out that the body itself, the negativity itself, it wants to serve God on its own volition. You don't have to force it. It wants to serve God because it's pleasurable for it to serve God.
Right. I just didn't know who was doing.
So that's the Yashar. We didn't get to the Chassid yet.
Okay.
That's the Yashar.
Okay.
Does anyone have any questions or not clear about something?
That was Shlomo.
That was Shlomo HaMelech.
I'm sorry, so what would be an example of what he did? No, it's not.
So he basically brought the entire world to peace. That's the example. He made the whole world basically running to Jerusalem to give him gifts and to be part of God's plan. That's what he had no more enemies.
He had no enemies.
Right.
Yeah, basically the idea the women wanted to marry him is that they wanted to bring their nation under his dominance, right?
His idea.
Huh?
To bring all the nations.
Okay, his idea, their idea, it's the same thing. The idea is that he made them what? They didn't marry him unwillingly. He didn't have them as slaves. He was his idea, because he said, in this way, I will sort of demonstrate that the entire world is subjected to, not subjected, is interested in marrying and joining divinity.
At what point did that all, after he passed away, it all broke off?
No, even in his own lifetime, towards the end of his lifetime, he sort of lost hold of the reins. Okay, so we're getting it.
The good old days.
V'yesh lomar. So the point is the Hishtalshlus your enemy or your friend? If it's your enemy, you can still win. But if it's your friend, Adarabah, then you don't even have any more enemies. It's a higher level of perfection. And we're talking about the Hishtalshlus here. We're talking about the fact that the world is a separate entity to God with its own sort of natural, it's hiding God. And it's doing its own thing, and it thinks itself to be an independent agent, and it wants to be sort of separate. So that's the enemy, right? So there's ways that Hashem can just come in and control it and master and be the master of it, the master of war, and he can make the Egyptians do what he wants by subduing them and breaking them. That's one way to go, but it's kind of a bummer, because all you do is show that, okay, God, you're stronger than the world. Okay, that's a big wonder. That's great. I never knew. But if you can get that the world all of a sudden wants the Eibishter, that's a higher power of Hashem, basically. It's showing that there isn't even an entity which other than his.
As long as Shlomo had dominion over his enemies, Yitzhak, he was able to project that out in the world. When he lost it.
I don't know, it's hard to say. Okay, yeah, something of that nature. I don't think he had a Yetzer Hara exactly, but...
Well, like we say, he lost it towards the end of his life, because his Yetzer Hara got it.
I don't know about Yetzer Hara. Tzaddikim don't have a Yetzer Hara, but something happened there.
Something like that.
Okay.
Is this also a mushal someone's supposed to relate to themselves?
For sure.
Like pushing themselves to do something they don't want to versus
I'll tell you what it is, ready?
Yeah.
The difference is between Musar and Chassidus.
Right.
Musar is a way of approaching your God, your Jewish world, that basically you're bad, and you're not going to put up with that, and you're going to force yourself to do the right thing in every situation, and you're going to just live in a state of stressing your body to the point that you never let it enjoy what it wants to enjoy, because it's an animal and it's running around in the wrong direction, and you got the reins and you're going to control it.
Right.
Hasidus comes and basically goes a different approach. It says, okay, that's true. We're not knocking that reality, but let's focus on something else. Let's focus on the fact that there's unbelievable, untold pleasure in serving God. Because look at how amazing Hasidus is. Look, if you start thinking about divine things, you realize the preciousness of a mitzvah. Even your animal soul can start to realize the preciousness of a mitzvah. Even your animal soul can realize how rewarding it is to go and help people and to make a dwelling place for Hashem. So your animal soul also has other interests, let's face it, but the more you start convincing him that it's pleasurable for him to serve God, you don't have to fight with him anymore, because it becomes his pleasure to do the right thing. So that's just there. You don't even have to. You can win the war without fighting the war. This is if you're paying attention. This is exactly what we've been saying in all the sichas we learned. There's like sur meirava asay tov, which is the idea of beating the Greeks was the sur meira, and finding the oil was the asay tov. And we said, if you remember this sicha that we learned on Shabbos, that even though historically the winning of the war became before the finding of the oil, it was spiritually it was the other way around. Hashem wanted to give us the miracle of finding the oil, and in order to do that, he had to quickly brush away the Greeks. In other words, in his reality, beyond time, the primary thing was finding the oil, and the secondary thing was winning the war. Winning the war was a result of us finding the oil. Even though historically, chronologically, it happened first, that doesn't matter. Hashem had his plans that are beyond time. And the Rebbe brought out a lesson from that, meaning what? The proper order of things is not to first fight your enemy and then do good, but on the contrary, you should go do good, do what's pleasurable. In other words, take a step in a mitzvah, take another step in a mitzvah, and then ultimately that itself will automatically defeat the enemy. Okay, I'm trying to sum up that whole sikha, but whoever was there should be understandable. Anyway, going on. V'yesh lomar. We could say, D'zeu sh'amra zal. This that the sages said, Kol hamalamed es ben am ha'aretz Torah. Anyone who teaches the son of a simpleton Torah, afilu HaKadosh Baruch Hu gozer gezerah mivatla. Then even if Hashem would decree a decree, it will be nullified for that person. Bishvilo. So in other words, it's a very high thing to go and go mifsuim, teach someone, Torah, and who's didn't come from it, doesn't know what it is, that to the point that even if Hashem will make a decree in his life, he'll nullify it for such a person. Shenemar, where do you see that? V'im totzi yakam izolel kfi tiyeh. Right? It says basically, you're going to take out preciousness from something, lowly. To remove something precious from something lowly. Yakar mizolel, something precious from something, and that's what you're taking. You're basically getting this guy who was not particularly such a great guy. You're getting his son, which you're extracting from him a jewel. And it says, kafi tihiyeh, it will be like my mouth, basically. In other words, I will decree upon him that good things will happen to him. The lashon mevatla bishvilo. So we're getting exact. It says such a person, even if there was a decree, Hashem will nullify it for him. And this idea that it says it's going to nullify it, particularly, it looks like Hashem is nullifying it for him. And what does it mean Hashem is doing it for him? That this is even a higher level than what we say that Hashem decrees and the tzaddik undoes. Up until now, we were talking about a state where Hashem makes a decree and the tzaddik can undo the decree. Right. In this particular statement of the Chazal, it looks like Hashem will undo the decree. Even if Hashem made a decree, He'll undo it for this guy. That what really makes Hashem have pleasure, right? It's the talking bird again. That it's when there's a transformation from darkness to light. What gives Hashem the ultimate pleasure is when something which is on a low level transforms itself to being on a high level. Even a talking bird, even though it's still just a bird and its quality of speech is definitely less than a man, nonetheless, because it's a bird that's talking, it's a gevald, and basically it's a chiddush, and Hashem has pleasure from such a thing, like a king would have pleasure from such a thing. So too, when a person will do tshuva, even though he's wrapped up in a coarse body, and he's living in a world of klippa, where the clippers are dominant over here, but he'll do a little mitzvah, it gives Hashem a great level of tainug, when you're going to transform darkness to light. And that's the idea of called hotzi yakar mizolel. That's the idea of taking out this precious jewel from this am haaretz. That's what it means, like teaching the Ben Ha'aretz Torah, you're turning darkness into light. You're transforming like a bad, Jewish home that didn't have light, and you're making it have light. So it reaches a higher level. Not that the tzaddik undoes the decree, but Hashem will undo the decree. Because why is Hashem undoing His decrees? Because you tapped into His pleasure. And when you tap into Hashem's pleasure, that automatically changes His will. You don't have to go up to the level of His will and start tampering with it. You made Hashem's will automatically different because you made His pleasure arise. Because you tickled what makes his fancy. V'kevan shemavodaso shel tzadik zeh shemelamed u'mefitz Torah chutza. Since the service of this type of tzaddik that teaches and spreads Torah outside, gam leben ha'aretz, even to someone who's not a Torah, scholar by any means, naiset tainug dilamai. This gives Hashem mamish pleasure. In other words, miftzoim and getting Hasidus into the mind of another Yid who doesn't come from anywhere. This is mamish the most pleasure. This is the most pleasure you can give to God. That's why the Rabbi said, give us such a gift and sent us that's our mission.
You're covered for a lot of degrees.
It's a great thing you can do. There's a Yom that says something to the effect that anyone who's going to be occupied in the spreading of Pnimius Torah, they don't have to worry because I'm going to be watching over them. You know what I mean? That's what you want to be doing with your life. You want to be setting up a situation where you have students and you're teaching them Pnimius Torah. You're finding new people in the street. You're teaching them Pnimius Torah. You're talking to your family, your friends. That's what you should be occupied in because it gives Hashem pleasure. Therefore, what happens is that the way the decree is nullified through him, it's not in such a way that Hashem decrees and he has to sort of go tampering with Hashem's decree and undo it, which he would have powers to do that, if a tzaddik would have powers to do that also. So in the lower perspective of this, where the tzaddik has to undo the decree, that means that as far as the Seder Ishtalshlus is holding, as far as nature is holding, there is a decree, right? The river is running according to its natural flow. But what? Since the guy is able to tap into above nature, and he's able to draw down from a level which dominates on the Seder Ishtalshlus, as it says, Tzadik Moshe B'Yiras Elokim, he means pateles, so he can nullify it. That's the lower level, right? That the nature is running its own course, and he has to sort of jump in and tamper with Hashem's will. But through this guy, who's basically a tzaddik on the level of turning darkness into light, it's that the tainug, he reaches the sha'al yidei tainug pnimius hakeser na'aseh l'maylam avodaso. He makes a pleasure of divinity upstairs from his service. Bittul ha'gezer hu gam mitzad hadargah hakadosh baruch hu. That means that the nullity of the decree is also from the standpoint of Hakadosh Baruch Hu himself, of the Seder Ishtalshlus himself. In other words, here he's saying that what happens is like this, right? Here's what happens. Now we can sort of put in one little detail which I think is going to be very helpful, because from the beginning of this class, we're trying to understand what's the difference between when Hashem's will has to dominate on nature versus when Hashem's pleasure is sort of accessed. And we said nature sort of automatically goes along. But there was sort of a weird thing there, because nature seemingly is not having pleasure from divine things. Its pleasure is from natural things. It's already sort of going in a course of the lower will, right? So how all of a sudden do you tap into the pleasure which is inside of the godly pleasure, so to speak, which is inside of the world? It's like seemingly very hard to get to that. You follow that question? So here's how you do it. The reason why the pleasure of divinity is not found inside of the world is because the world does not give Hashem pleasure. Hashem is basically upset with the world. The only reason he keeps it going is because maybe one day someone will come along and do a mitzvah down there, and it's worth it for him to keep it in existence sort of against his will in order to prolong the ability for Jewish people to have free choice and serve him. But so long as they're not doing that, he doesn't take very much pleasure in the Seder Ishtalshlus, and therefore the divine pleasure is not found in the world. And therefore, usually, since it's not pleasurable for the world, so what happens is, when you go and turn darkness into light, you create pleasure for God. All of a sudden, the pleasure of the Eibishter is released. And once the pleasure of the Eibishter is released, he also takes pleasure in his world. You follow me? And then all of a sudden, it's like pleasurable for him to have a world, and the world is therefore on board with he's happy about the world. The world is a pleasing thing to him, which means the world has now sort of accessed divine pleasure because of your service in it, and therefore you don't have to go up and undo the decrees of the world. Hashem now has pleasure in the world. So the decrees are automatically nullified because the divine pleasure, the world is presenting divine pleasure. It's not hiding divine pleasure. It's a subtle point there, but maybe that's a little bit clearer. Does everyone understand that more or less?
Yep.
Yaron, you are divine pleasure incarnate. Chaim.
Isn't the main reason though that the Eibishter won't destroy the world because of the bris mitzvah of Noach?
Oh.
He won't destroy it. In other words, but
Get pleasure
he doesn't mean he's happy with it.
I didn't say he's happy with it, but you said he don't destroy it because he thinks maybe tzaddikim one day. I thought it's more because of the promise.
No, why did he make that promise? Because he decided he was going to determine himself that they're going to fix this thing. And it was the bris was, I'm not going to destroy the world again because Noach found pleasure in my eyes. And there is a tzaddik over there who's going to take care of business. Like he made a bris basically with Noach, in that they'll still continue to produce tzaddikim.
And they are still, and they're chayiv, and his descendants are chayiv in the mitzvahs that were given to him.
Yeah.
Too, so
Yeah.
What's that?
The Mashiach will come in two ways, no? Ben Zakai or Ben Chayiv. Like, which means even if it goes all bad. Yeah. So in a way, there's a higher plan.
Well, no, meaning if it goes all bad, meaning what? It means that's going to tap into Ein Yisrael Nigolan Ella B'tshuva, right? In other words, we're going to be redeemed by doing tshuva.
Yeah.
So going all bad means things get so bad that we're going to all like scream out tati tati and do tshuva in such a way, as opposed to like a bal tshuva, as opposed to sort of like being responsible and working for a living and taking care of the job without like letting the whole business collapse, right? So it's, in either way, it's not like things are going to collapse completely. If they get so dark, like we're learning in this very mimer, the darkness itself has the power to draw a person's like pinimius kochos out and say things are so bad, I'm going to change my life forever. You know, when you hit rock bottom, in other words, is when usually a person does tshuva.
Yeah.
So that's what it means. It's like you're going to come whether if we're zakai, so then adrabah, we don't have to hit rock bottom. We'll just fix the thing. But if we're not, then we're going to wind up doing a heavy duty level of tshuva. It's not like
you're end up going to be Ben Zakai again.
Right.
So there's only one way.
There's only one way in that capacity. In other words, it could happen either way. It could happen by falling.
First and then
Yeah. All right, let's go on a little bit. Hine Yedua. It's known Dagam Sha'ati Kumalashan Netak V'Nivdal. Even though the word Atik, which is the second level of Keser, comes from the language of separated and torn away. Right, and that's what. Right, why is Atik called separated and torn away? Because it's completely separated from the worlds. Right, it's beyond the will of the world. It's sort of like divine pleasure. We said before, it's hitting the Or Ein Sof, for the worlds don't even take place there. So that's why it's called Atik, because it's so far removed. Nevertheless, Mizeh shenikra b'shem Atik Yomin. We talked about this before. The fact that it's called Atik Yomin, it's not just Stam called Atik. It's called separated of days. Separated away from days. Shunetak miyomi, which means it's removed from the days. What are the days? The days are the Hishtalshalus. Right? The days represent the 10 spheros. So we're saying this is completely removed from days. Which means it's not completely removed because you're like mentioning what it's removed from in its very name. Which means even though it's away from there, it's away from there. And it has some kind of holding with that place. Move on Shagam Lagabi Adarga da Atik. So therefore it comes out that even according to the level of Atik, Yeshnam Yomin, there's such a thing called days, called spheros, called the world. Elashu Netak Mihim. But he's removed from them. V'yaser mizeh, what's more, Shagam Adarga Shenikra Atik Stam Shalamayl Me Atik Yomin. So he says, what's more? So let's go beyond that. There's Atik Yomin. There's also something just called Atik. He says even the level of Atik, which is above Atik Yomin, Mikom Makom, Kevan Shenikra B'Shem Atik, nonetheless doesn't help it all that much, because since it's still called Atik, the Perush Atik Hu Shenetak, and what does Atik mean? It means it's removed. Behechrich Lomer, you have to say Sheyesh no Inyan Shemenu Hu Netak. You have to say there's something it's removed from. So even though Atik has basically this dual meaning, on one hand it means it's completely beyond the worlds, but in that, in fact you're saying it's beyond the worlds, or even if you're just going to say it's beyond something. That's what the word beyond means. So you never get completely divorced from the thing. Just like the word divorce, right? Divorce, okay, I'm done with that lady, I'm divorced, but now you're divorced, right? It's like you can't get away from her. That's what you got to tell divorced people, is that you're still married when you're done. Anyway, I mean before they get divorced, they should tell them. But anyway, so he says, "L'chein bittul gezerah." So therefore, it comes out that the bittul of the gezerah shemitzad hadargad ishtalshlus, nullifying a decree from the state of the ishtalshlus al the amshachas atik. So this level that we just got through explaining how wonderful it was that you can get the nature itself to go along with the decree because you tapped into Hashem's divine pleasure. That's called atik. But even that, where you're going to get the world to go along with you, he bederech pa'ula. You still have to do something and decree that this should take place. Now we're getting into the details. We're probably going to have to hold here. But let's just sort ourselves out. We were saying, what's the difference between tzaddik, yashar, and chassid? We sort of have it on the table now. Tzaddik, he has to moshel. He has to dominate on the nature. Yashar, he doesn't have to dominate on the nature. He taps into the pleasure, which is intrinsic to the world doing the right thing, but he still has to command the world to do that thing. He has to make some kind of activity to undo, right, and to realign the nature to do something. It's a derech pa'ula, which is what we said was the difference between, let's say, the Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, who commanded the river to split, but he had to command it, versus the higher level which we didn't get into, which is going to be Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and the Hasidic masters, that they don't have to even command. It's an automatic. Like Rashbi, it rained as soon as he started to say Torah. So it's not in a derech of pa'ula. So this is the unique difference that this chassid has. He doesn't even have to command, even though when he'll command the world to do it at the lower level, the world's happy to fulfill that command. It's not a forced thing. But here he doesn't even have to command. He doesn't have to tell the world to do something other than it's doing. The world will automatically do the godly thing without having to be told. That's going to be tomorrow's class, basically. Okay.
In order for the guy to become a chassid, you have to go through, first he's a tzaddik, and then he's a yishar, and then
Probably. Yeah.
So he as a yishar guy, he taps into the pleasure so much that he's it just becomes unified. And now,
right.
He doesn't even have to command anymore. Now it's just
because you can see already the difference. Since he's tapping into the pleasure, he's also taking pleasure from Hashem, and that's why he's tapping into the pleasure, because he's feeling the divine pleasure. So you can see already from there, there's something self. That's not the chassid. The chassid is doing everything purely for Hashem.
So then he gets even higher than that. He's I don't care about the pleasure.
Right. So there he goes beyond pleasure.
What about if you go to a kever and you pray for some decree to be changed? So what level would that be for the person in the kever? Or whatever.
Depends what level that person's on.
Yeah, that's right. No,
We'll be waiting for a couple of days.
Where are you heading? Heading out of town? Oh, yeah? Lots of thousands of people.